Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. It's broadcast number 508, and it's August the 30th, 1981. There's an interesting article in the newspaper this week I just thought I'd mention before I get on to some heavier material. One was the United States was accused of lying regarding the North Korea flights and firing the missiles. From Tokyo, North Korea today said that the United States was lying about who fired at the United States airplanes, and the United States was officially lying that this was an espionage act on the part of the United States, in quotes, to aggravate tension and start a new war in Korea. Well, that was August the 30th, and one day later there was an article in the newspaper, August 28th, and 2 days later Barry Goldwater said, this was the Sunday paper, Associated Press, Barry Goldwater doubts the Korea firing story. Senator Barry Goldwater said he's not sure if he believes the Defense Department report that North Korea fired a surface-to-air missile at a U.S. reconnaissance plane. I doubt if North Korea tried it. That's interesting because Barry Goldwater has a military commission. He's been close to the military. What he is, in fact, saying is that he thinks the United States Defense Department is lying, and this is a clear demarcation from people accepting at face value everything that the United States Defense Department says. It can be that many people are really afraid of Alexander Haig and Caspar Weinberger and the fact that these people, as accused by Jimmy Carter as being warmongers, really trying to provoke a lot of problems all over the world. Obviously they are when I list off some of the countries, but Goldwater said he believes North Korea in this case and doesn't believe the Defense Department. One small article, suggestion from Springfield, Illinois by a Senate Republican counsel, Philip Weber. He has a solution to the prison problem. You know, our prisons are getting overcrowded, and Ronald Reagan wants several $1 billion to build new prisons, and be careful of Reagan's prisons. One evening I'll do a complete broadcast, if I can do it in one evening, on Ronald Reagan and California prisons. Well, a Senate Republican from Springfield suggests that prisoners should have two choices. One, put them in a coma and stop a potential danger to society, or two, shave their heads and eyebrows, identify them with day-glow orange uniforms, and put them at work out in the community, bring them home at night. Either let them be sleeping quietly or put them to work, and that would solve the problem. Another article in the San Francisco Examiner today, August 30th, the divers search for 71 million Russian gold. I mentioned several weeks ago the missing gold and the sunken ships with this large amount of gold on it since last October, when this attempt to bring the ship up was first published in the newspapers. It was worth about 20 million less. The value has gone up from 51 to 71 million. And there also is an article this week, the Andrea Doria, that I spoke about on various programs, the Italian ship that went down with money from the Bank of Rome. There's from $1 to $4 million, and they brought up the safe and got into the bank. They knew exactly where to go and brought that up this last week. For those of you who collect memorabilia, you can order a tape cassette of the shooting of John Paul II, starting within minutes after his shooting, 5 minutes after the Pope was shot at St. Peter's Square. And the tape recording goes through the description of his operation and medical treatments, and then it gives the prayer where he praises and forgives his would-be assassin. If you want those cassettes, they're $3.50 from the Office of Propaganda, ESVILUPPO. Can't pronounce it. Vatican Radio Station, Vatican City, Italy. I've collected various items through the years having to do with political assassinations and memorabilia, and they become amazingly valuable later. For $3.50, you can get the Pope shooting, the medical descriptions, the rearrangement of his colon, his bowel, his blood pressure, and so forth, and then the prayer of forgiveness. The Italian newspaper announced this week, the Associated Press, that even though the man who has been charged with shooting the Pope is now in prison, Mehmet, they're looking for an accomplice in the Pope shooting. Italian justice works swiftly there as compared to the United States. John Hinckley Jr. was just arraigned this week and charged with shooting Ronald Reagan, and the others in Washington, D.C. that I'll go into. But even though they have a man in prison for shooting the Pope, they are looking for accomplices, and they don't settle so easily. There was every reason to believe that John Hinckley Jr. had friends or a second gunman that was photographed at the balcony, and I'll go more into that in a few weeks, the subject of the more evidence on the conspiracy to shoot Ronald Reagan. But in Italy, they don't settle so easy, and they're going for the other people who assisted in placing this person at St. Peter's Square and providing him with money until the Pope was shot. I will do a few more weeks. I'll get caught up on the Larry Layton trial, the conspiracy to kill a federal agent, Mr. Dwyer, at the airport in Guyana, and also the shooting of Representative Ryan at the airport. The important thing about this trial of Larry Layton on the conspiracy in Guyana is to blame all of the bloodshed for over 900 people who died on Jim Jones. It is similar to the end of World War II to blame Adolf Hitler for Germany's problems or Mussolini for Italy's problems. The headline stories read such as one big story in the paper this morning, The Maverick and the Martyr. The Maverick being Jim Jones and the martyr being Representative Leo Ryan. What they failed to tell you when they referred to him as a martyr, they referred to Ryan as a do-gooder who got caught in the hands of the beast and went down there to help some people. They overpass always the famous Use Ryan bill, which is being overturned by the CIA and Ronald Reagan. Leo Ryan was the man who put the muscles into stopping CIA covert action. He got access to information about CIA activity in Angola coming out of Guyana. He was aware of improprieties of the CIA, and he was a man who wanted to stop the power of the CIA. And he was, in fact, a martyr, but not just for simplistic reasons in Jonestown, but because he bucked up against the Central Intelligence Agency. One of the articles covering the Larry Layton trial in the Chronicle has the lead topic, Layton trial told of Jones' brutal control. And this is how Jim Jones was so cruel to people. And another article, Layton used 2 drugs at the time of the airport ambush. What's wrong with these articles? Well, for one thing, Jim Jones had brutal control, but men like Mark Lane and Charles Gary and Tim Stone, an attorney from Stanford, and Stanford doctors like Dr. Godlett or a doctor from Westchester, white lawyers, American lawyers, were part of a system of concentration activity, of drugging, of whipping, of rattlesnakes, of terror, of false burials, of terrorizing children, of beatings, working all day, inferior food, white upper echelon getting fair food, and the workers working 12 hours a day and listening to ranting lectures in the evening. The white entourage that set up Jonestown, the banks that set it up, that knew of the difference between right and wrong and fairness, were selling Jonestown to the last drop of blood. Mark Lane was on the radio in October before the deaths came down telling people from KGO how glorious it was. And the lawyers were the ones, I believe, who were responsible. Start with the lawyers and the doctors, because those are the people that have graduated from our colleges, from our medical system, our law schools. They're responsible for these deaths, not Jim Jones. He himself was drugged. And the tragedy is that the blame isn't put on the doctors and lawyers and the San Francisco police or the San Francisco echelon of politics who set up this activity, or the Los Angeles police, or the people from the Justice Department in Sacramento who are in power today. The entire trial is to show the madness of Jim Jones and not the people who are alive and profiting from it today, writing books and articles and so forth. Now, about the Reagan incident and shooting in Washington, D.C., many reports are coming out these last few weeks that one of them from the Houston Post, glaring gaps cited in presidential protection. Now, what do they do when there were gaps in the president's security? Do they fire anybody? No, they promote them. All they say is we need more money for protection because there are gaps, and yet they refuse to go into the background of Hinckley or who in the Secret Service told John Hinckley where to be, who he met at the hotel where Secret Service agents stay directly across the street from the Secret Service. Another government involvement which is dangerous came out this last week, an article, Missing Link in Ronald Reagan Attack. The Washington News Bureau says that Ronald Reagan's shirt, his tie, his cufflinks were lost in the hospital, and the FBI is looking for them. The items came up missing at George Washington Hospital, the University Hospital emergency room, after the FBI sealed it and after Reagan's admission. They had kept it secret that his clothes were missing. And he was in the emergency room. They went through the trash, and they looked in the intensive care unit, and they cannot account for the president's shirt, his cufflinks, or his tie. Now, these are important items because, remember, the bullet was supposed to have come from where John Hinckley was standing in front of the hotel in Washington, D.C. Then a later report say it ricocheted off of a car, which was like 45 degrees different than where John Hinckley was standing, and entered Ronald Reagan. Then there was a discrepancy of how the bullet entered, and now the clothing was taken out of the surgery room, the intensive care. This happened identically in the John Kennedy assassination and the Robert Kennedy assassination. When the security guard shot Robert Kennedy from in back of Robert Kennedy, feigned Caesar, an inch from the back of the head, and fell to the ground, the fabrics of his clothing would show the trajectory of the bullet. But not only were the ceiling panels removed, but the sleeve of the shirt and coat that Robert Kennedy wore was cut off in either the morgue or the room where they took his body. They cut the sleeve off, and to this day it has never been seen, and it could show the direction of bullets that went from the backward to the front that did not enter from Sirhan's gun that was in front of Robert Kennedy, because none of Sirhan's bullets got into his body. So how could a shirt and sleeve, as well as Sirhan's gun, was disposed of right away in the ceiling panels? But in the case of the John Kennedy assassination, John Connolly's clothing were put in a paper bag and given to Senator Yarborough, and they were sent to the dry cleaner in Washington, D.C., and they were of no value to the FBI before the Warren Commission, when the FBI agents and the doctors disclaimed the official version of the way John Kennedy was killed, or John Connally, the governor of Texas, was shot. They said, bring in the clothing, and they said, well, the clothing were dry cleaned and have no value. So here again is a missing link in Ronald Reagan's attack, where the clothing were taken out of the emergency room. They looked in the trash, the intensive care. They can't find the shirt, never mind the cufflinks or the tie, unless there were extra holes in them that were used with silencers, because I feel there was somebody inside the car, and when Ronald Reagan was facing that car, he could have received bullets from a silencer. He blamed the Secret Service for jumping on him, that he was really injured or hurt when he got into the car. And it would be interesting to find the clothing, and I think it's outrageous that they can't account for the clothing. John Hinckley Jr. has been arraigned this week. Finally, he won't go to trial until November, December. According to Los Angeles Times stories, he's asked to be released on bail. He pleads he's innocent. And in the meanwhile, Mr. Brady has had more surgery. James Brady, one of the people that John Hinckley Jr. shot, and according to the New York Times, he was coherent and chattering away. Another report said that he had a birthday this week, and according to the accounts of the Los Angeles Times and a newspaper out of Santa Barbara, Associated Press, Brady has the biggest grin on his face you ever saw. His wife said on a long-distance telephone, well, forget the grin. Let's hear if the guy is talking. We know he's grinning. He's grinning from ear to ear, but let's see if there's anything between his ears, if the guy can even talk. It's disgusting that Hinckley wants to be out walking the streets from November, December. We don't even know. I believe that Brady is jabbling and chattering, but what else is he doing, and how long does this charade go on? Another item on the ruling on Dennis McNeil, the brother of the famous McNeil brothers, who was suggested to have been murdered June the 1st. Of course, the New York City involvement, Dr. Elliot Gross from the New York City Coroner's Office did an autopsy on this poor corpse and declared as of 2 days ago that it actually was not murder, that he wasn't murdered. The man had been taken and beaten up. He could have had broken spleen, which they were going to operate on. Doctors in Chicago said that if you ruptured a spleen and attacked somebody, it still may not show for 5 or 6 weeks. The two brothers have gone, but it's interesting that the New York City coroner, according to an article in the Associated Press, August the 28th, 1981, said the New York authorities, who originally refused to perform the autopsy, now are going up to Augusta, Maine to do the autopsy. Now, Dr. Elliot Gross would go to Augusta, Maine from New York City. Elliot Gross works with the CIA. Dr. Bodden, who preceded him in the New York autopsy offices, was with the CIA. These are the same creeps that said there could be no autopsy on Nelson Rockefeller to find out if he was poisoned in that mysterious death that made way for Ronald Reagan's presidency. This is a situation that just stinks to high heaven, and I'm sure the case isn't over. Even though they had a death ruling on the man, shows autopsy done, no foul play, I don't believe it for a minute. There was a long article in the New York Daily News, July 29th. FBI investigates the mystery death in the CIA case, and it tells about tape recordings and conversations of Max Ugel, a man that William Casey had to put into the CIA's most controversial position. And Ugel had a warning to the McNeils to cool it, and they were literally were tantamount to death threats on tape recordings. And one of the McNeil lawyers heard Ugel say, "I'll kill the bastard," referring to the McNeils. And Ugel also said that Thomas McNeil, one of the brothers, would be found hurt if a certain loan he had wasn't repaid. There was talk of killing, there was talk of hurting, and there was suggestion that this particular brother, Dennis, was punched in and kidnapped in order to keep quiet about future operations, and he kept quiet according to his wife. But this story is not over yet, and there's a lot more to go on this story. The New York newspapers and others have had links of Max Ugel and William J. Casey to controversial matters. The most controversial, of course, being the links to Bobby Vesco and organized crime and the power that Vesco has. Max Ugel was a very important person, probably in his business ventures in Japan for many, many years before he got the important post as head of counterintelligence. But even though they brought this poor body up, the same person who refused to do the autopsy in the first place goes up to Augusta, Maine, and does the second. So how, he's covering his base the second time, how do you expect a disinterested or an honest autopsy? In other words, they say, well, if we're going to have an autopsy that we wouldn't let you have the first time, then we're going to be there to do it the second time. That isn't fair. Why not let the doctors in Augusta, Maine do it? And because it involves Max Ugel and the McNeil brothers and William Casey of the CIA, and we know the CIA's proclivity for murders and cover-up, it seems to me that no CIA doctor or anyone affiliated with New York City should be involved, especially the track record of the New York Coroner's Office. There's an article out of the United Press this week that just took a little bit of space, and this has to do with Mr. William Casey. And I think it's important to go into it apropos of those kinds of mysterious operations. This article is titled CIA Chief's Big Time Clients, and it says that when William Casey went before the Senate Intelligence Committee for a confirmation hearing, he gave them a revised list of his 117 legal clients, but he cited at that time only 43 clients at the time of the hearing. It was turned over to the committee by Casey's former New York firm of Rogers and Wells. Rogers is the former government official who represented the Shah of Iran. An earlier list that Casey submitted for his January confirmation hearing cited only 43 clients from 2 years before his CIA nomination. So he has a revised list where he's giving them 9 more clients this last week to update because he's under fire for some of his mysterious connections. Well, who do you think the clients are? I'll list you the 8 that are in the newspaper, and let's guess about who the 109 are. Okay, one of them was ITT and the other is Robert Vesco. So who are the 107? One is the government of South Korea. Now, you know the hanky-panky with the Korea Gate problem, the paying off of our entire Congress, fixing them up with prostitutes, double dealing, the coup in South Korea where the current president offed his successor at a dinner table, killed him, and became the head of South Korea. I did a few weeks ago the problem of former Congressman Robert Leggett, who's now married to Susie Parks, who set up a big Korea Gate scam and mentioned his questionable maritime oceanic connections in Hawaii and otherwise. There's the Reverend Moon with the Nazi connections in South Korea and the congressional blackmail. He's the attorney for South Korea. Another company that he represents listed here is the Saudi Arabian Lines. Well, is that a travel agency? What are the Saudi Arabian Lines? Because the Nugan Bank, remember the travel agencies with their big headquarters, one of their 16 headquarters was in Saudi Arabia. Our CIA director is the attorney for the Saudi Arabian Lines. Is this a CIA dummy front? What are its connections to a lot of operations going on in the world? And is this director of the CIA simply a grand master outside of Edward Bennett Williams for holding his finger in the cookie jars of these huge clandestine operations while he's the attorney for them? Imagine what kind of a double standard that is. It's similar to Alan Dulles being the attorney for so many huge corporations in New York City and being director of the CIA at the same time. And we saw the catastrophe of what he left us in terms of foreign policy and mangled concessions with his various Nazi organized crime connections. Another client is the Associated Press. Well, isn't that cozy to have the CIA director with the Associated Press as his client? At the time of the Warren Commission hearings, when Earl Warren was having trouble with the news media breaking leaks about conspiracies to kill John Kennedy that they were supposed to cover up, he said at the minutes of the meeting, let's call in the president of the Associated Press and United Press, and we'll handle those rumors. Well, William Casey of the CIA has a client, the Associated Press. Also listed in this article, he has a newspaper out in Long Island that's one of his business dealings, the CIA director having a newspaper. Now, here's a juicy client, if there ever was one, and we'll have to do maybe a whole evening on that. That's Caesar's World out in Las Vegas with their interlocking connections in Atlantic City. Any conspiratorial-minded person would really lick their chops at this one. This involves Frank Sinatra, just got on the board. But at the time of the Harold Smith arrest and the scandal of the Wells Fargo $200 or $300 million, it linked into Caesar's World and to international connections of boxing, sports, organized crime, and the intelligence community, and interweaving that would take just an evening alone on that. Each one of these our CIA director has as a client. Keep in mind, as I said, I'm talking about 8 clients. Can you imagine doing 2 years, 1 hour a week of the clients of William Casey? That would take 2 years to do a interlocking. Another one is singer Connie Francis. I have to look up, there was a scandal of her and a rape and her brother with organized crime and early connecting links to questionable characters. I have a lot on Connie Francis, but it wasn't at hand when I came in this week. Another client is New York City and the Nassau suburb. Well, I think of Dr. Bodden and Dr. Gross from the Nelson Rockefeller or the McNell autopsy. If our CIA director is the attorney for New York City and they send their coroner to go up to look into a murder that might involve the CIA director, that's a little crummy too. I don't see how he represents the New York City and Nassau County and sends employees of the city of New York to cover the exhuming of a body that involves his contacts and appointments as a like Max Ugel for a secret operation. Another interesting client is the Bank of Paris. I have a French connection to the Italian scandal, the Ronald Reagan scandal that I don't have time for this week, that I'll do next week, but keep in mind William Casey as an attorney for the Bank of Paris. And then another interesting one is the government of Indonesia. He's the attorney. These are holdings or business operations that he kept from the Intelligence Committee when he was confirmed for the director of CIA. The government of Indonesia as well as South Korea, and then a Pertamina Indonesia state oil-owned oil company. Can you imagine a list of information that he held back from his confirmation hearings, a revised list of his 117 clients, and at the time he gave the name of 43 clients. Well, you can take Indonesian foreign policy, or what Mr. Haig or Weinberger will do in Indonesia, or how many troops we need in Indonesia. When we have a foreign policy there, or keep a dictator in, is to protect the oil investments of Mr. Casey's clients, or is it to protect the United States security? It became perfectly obvious to me years ago that the whole purpose of the CIA was to make countries safe for the investment of particular corporations, that this is the private police force of various corporations, nothing less, and that the people that we send in to overthrow Guatemala or El Salvador or Chile or Brazil have to do with not what the world thinks of us, or what will bring peace, or what will be best for the most amount of people. It simply has to do with how will the corporations get the most profit by what we do in these countries. And when you look at the CIA's role in that light, you'll realize why we're involved in so many dirty, anti-democratic operations, starting, say, with the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, or the overthrow of the government of Guatemala for United Fruit, and on down to those 77 military dictatorships we put into power. The whole purpose was to take the natural resources and put them in the hands of the corporations and make sure that our counter-espionage operations infiltrated camping grounds, restaurants, health food stores, such as the Christopher Boyce arrest, whether you're selling jogging shoes or telephone companies or whatever occupations, infiltrating every level, the press, the labor movement, every organization, to make sure that you save the world for the corporations. Well, that's William Casey, and there'll be more about this autopsy later. And I'm sure that McNeil brother Dennis didn't just happen to be jogging one morning and came in and went to the hospital and died prior to an operation on his spleen. I got an article this week from somebody, the newspaper In These Times. It comes out of Chicago, and I really should subscribe to it. I don't, and I get various clippings. This is the August 12th issue of 1981, a section In This World, and it has more to do, again, on the P2 Italian scandal. Those of you who have been following it may think that I've lost track of those pieces. I've just put it aside temporarily because there's been so many news stories that I thought should take precedence to it. But we'll get back some more to Licio Gelli. Licio Gelli is the Italian fascist who worked with Franco in Spain, with Hitler, and with Mussolini, and Perón in Argentina, who went back in Italy, setting up fascist organizations and Nazi organizations to overthrow the government. And his Christian Democratic Party there was funded by the CIA to make sure that the world was safe for fascism in Italy. Licio Gelli is still not available. He's either in Argentina or Uruguay. And this article In These Times, if you can get it, is some more information that I will update. I want you to know that I have not put it aside. In this article, there is a picture of a group of people being taken away, terrorists, and the important thing about this article, and the many that I've talked about, is, in quotes, there is suspicion that intelligence officials have manipulated the right and the left, and terrorism in Italy that is widespread is controlled by the right and left, is controlled by the fascist organizations. The people with Nazi leanings, secret death squads that massacre, that kill, that kidnap, are doing these operations in the name of the left, and that there is no difference. Now, when I wrote The SLA is the CIA in 1974 and went into great detail on the kidnapping of Pattyhurst and the use of the United States government, the CIA, Colston Westbrook from Southeast Asia, the mind control projects they were testing, Evel Younger, our district attorney from L.A., who went on to become the Attorney General, when I did a detailed 30 or 40-page article in The Realist on the right and left being caused by the right, there are only about 8 or 10 researchers in the United States that caught on to what I was trying to say. And it takes a major scandal in Italy for people to begin to realize that people like Licio Gelli and the hundreds of people named by the secret organizations that he belonged to have created the terrorism that looks like the left as an excuse to make the left look bad and for them to get more police and hurry on the fascism that they've planned all along. Now, this is the end of the first 30 minutes. We'll take a 1-minute break, and then when we get back, I'm going to do mostly the next 30 minutes on Libya, Gaddafi, and the CIA and terrorism at that level.
This concludes the first half of World Watchers International with Mae Brussell. We will return with the second.
Okay, this is Mae Brussell. We're having a little control. I assume that we're back on the air now and to begin the second half of World Watchers. As I said on the first half of the article referring to the terrorism in Italy and the fascists there, has a quotation saying that there is widespread suspicion that the intelligence officials in Italy have manipulated both the right and the left, and that the terrorism in Italy was manipulated by these people. And as I said before, this is what I've alleged for a long time. Before I get into the Libyan incident, I wanted to give you a source material for the allegation I made last week about the Lake Tahoe bombing. I'm going to be doing a lot more about this. This was an article that was in the paper August 28th of just last week, 1981, in the Houston Post. And it says bombing suspect was planning a second try. And this article is out of Fresno, California, telling about J.W. Burgess Sr., a man charged with the August 1980 bombing of Harvey's Resort Hotel Casino. That only cost $11 million to repair and take care of. And this article says that Burgess, who told an interviewer he had been a Luftwaffe pilot in Hitler's Luftwaffe during World War II, he was a CIA agent, used a bomb, and it was using a bomb at Harvey's, or he was going to the Bank of America headquarters and bomb them next for extortion. One way to get his money and fund his operation was to ask for a large amount of money or blow the place up to finance his continuous rampage. But you see, when you bring people to this country, such as John Waldo Burgess, who was involved with the Luftwaffe and Hitler's gang, and you put them in the CIA, you get bombings in Reno and other places, and what do you expect when you bring these kinds of characters in? There's one other article that was interesting out of the Houston Post. This was August 21st, 1981, and a friend sent to me. It's about a smuggler who wants to get out of prison. Now, lawyers for a 74-year-old convicted heroin smuggler have been identified as top figures in organized crime, and they've been making deals. According to this article, these lawyers have been making deals with various crime figures, and he wants the truth told out about a trial that took place in 1967. But this character, his name is Joseph Stassi Sr., S-T-A-S-S-I. He once was described as a lieutenant in the Vito Genovese mafia family, and he was an enforcer or button man in the Carlo Gambino family. He was indicted back in 1963 for $4.5 million heroin bust. But the interesting thing was when he was represented at a trial in 1967, his attorney was Anthony Frilou, and also famed criminal attorney Percy Foreman. Now that made me laugh when I saw it, because when James Earl Ray was arrested in London on charges of killing Martin Luther King, he was brought to this country, and Percy Foreman represented James Earl Ray, and James Earl Ray has pleaded for a new trial on the basis that organized crime figures were involved in killing Martin Luther King, and he was just a patsy. And it's interesting that when Sirhan was charged with killing Robert Kennedy, and I mentioned before that the security guard, Thane Caesar from Lockheed, had pulled that bullet behind Robert Kennedy, the attorney for Sirhan was Grant Cooper, who just came off the case of John Rosselli, one of the most famous organized crime figures in the United States. So a Percy Foreman, representing a man who worked with the Gambino family and the Genovese family, worked with James Earl Ray the next year, and Grant Cooper, who worked with John Rosselli, was representing Sirhan. And of course, you know who got the shaft. The political patsies, the mind-controlled zombies like James Earl Ray and Sirhan, went to jail, and the mob figures stayed out. Now, August the 21st this year, and I mentioned it last week on broadcast number 507, Alexander Haig had a press conference, and he said the Libyan incident is closed. He wants to end the whole thing about the airplanes, who shot who first. We won't play our tapes. Let's drop the whole matter. I don't want to discuss it. That's Alexander Haig. Well, there have been some interesting articles about Libya in the newspaper this week, and I guarantee you that they're going to keep pouring out for a long, long time. As I mentioned last year, as a summary of the news, the most important story to follow in the next year would be Frank Turple, Edwin Wilson, George Corcola, and the CIA people who've been arming Uganda, Gaddafi, because of the double play of the CIA sending weapons and explosives and funding the terrorism, as the Italian P2 scandal shows. In order to have a Gaddafi, we have to create him and then blame Moscow for arming him, while every account keeps going on and on about how the CIA is arming Gaddafi. The situation is so scandalous that I want to go into it once more with you and give you a chronology of the recent stories this past week. There is a long article in the New York Times this week and the San Jose Mercury by Jeff Girth and Philip Taubman called The United States Terrorist Trainers. Now, this article is important because Jeff Girth is a magnificent writer who did the large expose of Richard Nixon and the Mafia, Resorts International, B.B. Rebozo, Albanap, the entire Bahamas connection. Girth is one of the best writers in this country on this subject. When Seymour Hersh began his two-part story in the New York Times Magazine section on Wilson and Gaddafi and Libya and the CIA, you knew that this story would be breaking much larger soon, similar to the My Lai massacre or the Pentagon Papers. These stories are just seeping through now. So there was a long article, and I'll go into more details if we have time. The U.S. terrorist training, and this is from Jeff Girth. Another follow-up article, the Sunday paper for the New York Times and the San Jose Mercury, August 30th. Ex-CIA agent is implicated in explosive deals. Now, these articles have to do with some very sensitive areas. The Jeff Girth article has to do with the starting in 1977 of Edwin Wilson, who also was getting his money from that Nugan Bank in Australia, the CIA heroin-killing Green Beret assassination teams. Edwin Wilson began hiring 10 Green Berets who believed that their mission was to infiltrate Gaddafi in Libya. And they were sent, the CIA paid for them, they were sent out of Fort Bragg, and the CIA petty master Edwin Wilson was involved, and CIA agent Patrick Wilson, and Luke Thompson of the military. And they sincerely believed, starting in 1977, that they were going to infiltrate Gaddafi. Now, the way they were going to do it was to set up factories with hundreds of thousands of tons of ammunition, teach the Libyans to kill, teach them to blow up planes and kidnap and so forth. So from 1977 to 1981, all of these various crimes were being committed by Gaddafi and Carlos the terrorist, and we were pointing fingers to those terrible terrorists when we were supplying almost all the equipment and most of the planes, even a few Soviet planes. But the details on how to shoot and counterintelligence were done by the same Green Berets that gave you Vietnam and had a little free time and needed some money. So 1977, they were hired. Now, the second article that followed in the New York Times just 2 days later has to do with Edwin Wilson and the shipping of explosive illegally from Canada, operations shipping in Germany, out of Miami, out of Los Angeles, in Pomona, airports in Houston, Texas, how they sent explosives, how they sent equipment, how they trained the terrorists for Libya, and even involved a Secret Service agent from the White House who was part of the Special Forces, who worked in the White House when Jimmy Carter was there. Now, the reason these stories are breaking now, one of them was that Frank Turple and George Corcola were arrested in New York City a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, and the scandal began to break open. But if they hadn't been arrested on a fluke, they might still be supplying the left around the world and making it look as if the left were doing all this violence when you have to get it perfectly clear. The Defense Department, the State Department, the CIA, and dummy friend organizations were supplying the airplanes and the methods of wrapping and packing explosives, saying they were parts for oil drills. And from 1977 to 1981, we have supplied Gaddafi and Idi Amin and other countries the PLO, and much of it has been used to bomb Jewish people in France and in the Middle East, for the PLO to bomb in Israel, to kidnap airplanes such as Entebbe, to kill the athletes in Munich, Germany, the Israeli athletes at the Olympic Games. We have assisted in these areas, and they have even admitted their role in them. Now, as of the beginning of this year, when Ronald Reagan became president, one of his first speeches 8 days after being president, January 29th, was attacking Gaddafi as a terrorist. He says we won't condone his activities in Chad. Alexander Haig began his big attack against terrorists, and they kept referring to the fact that Moscow and the Soviet Union were training Gaddafi and the terrorism, and we cannot condone terrorism. So the Reagan administration was launched for this big scale against terrorism. Now, even though since January there have been many articles, and prior to the Reagan administration, many articles linking all of the weapons, the sale of weapons, the training on how to use them, linking the CIA and the special forces to these activities, the news media continues to blame Russia and the Soviet Union. It is like Goebbels' propaganda, and Adolf Hitler knew it perfectly. If you tell a lie often enough, it's a big enough lie, people still think Gaddafi should be killed because he's a terrorist. There was a cover of Newsweek, The Dangers of Gaddafi. We have many, many articles, U.S. Business News, The Danger of Gaddafi, and not one of these major news media magazines refers to the massive amount of articles coming out from the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal on the fact of where Gaddafi is getting his equipment. Now, just several weeks ago, July 25th, 1981, the House Intelligence Committee alerted Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States, was awakened, not like when they shot down the planes over Libya, and he was told that Max Ugel, the crony of William Casey, was planning an operation over Africa, and the House Intelligence didn't like it. They probably didn't like it because if they were going to kill Gaddafi, and Gaddafi supplies third largest supplier of United States oil, it could bring in Russia and start World War III, which Gaddafi has said it will do. So they alerted the president. They were nice enough to give him a choice, and they alerted him. That was July 25th. On July 26th, the Newsweek, it came out on the 26th, but it was dated ahead for first week in October, but it was on the stand on the 26th. Big headline, CIA plans to kill Gaddafi. On July 27th, one day later, the San Francisco Examiner had headlines across the front of the paper, Associated Press story, the CIA is to kill Gaddafi. And again, if we do it, there are tremendous implications of what this would bring. July 28th, one day later, the Washington Post changed the story that I mentioned last week and could hardly keep from laughing, but it isn't very funny. It said the CIA is going to overthrow Mauritania, that when they were told that there was an operation in Africa, they didn't mean Libya, they meant Mauritania, and they changed their mind. Whoops, we made a mistake, there's Mauritania. Now, that's okay, but they caught themselves with a boo-boo. So the Wall Street Journal, August the 4th, the next week, has an article where they slip in that the CIA target isn't Gaddafi to kill or Libya, but the CIA target is Gaddafi's influence in Mauritius. Now, Mauritius, as I mentioned last week, is off the Indian Ocean, and the House Intelligence Committee had a report of a country in Africa, so it's either Libya or Mauritania, so Mauritius wouldn't even be on the same continent, but the Wall Street Journal tried to cover the area and say it's Mauritius, and the LA Times, as I mentioned before, August the 7th, had an article, Tensions Threaten Mauritania, to make Mauritania in the news as if that was an operation we were considering. Now, Time magazine, August the 10th, ran a story accusing their competitor Newsweek of discrediting Casey. That William Casey wouldn't kill Gaddafi, and William Casey wasn't going into Africa in this way, that the they blamed Newsweek for jumping the gun on this activity. Well, August the 15th, 5 days later, the Washington Post ran their large story. The target was Mauritius, not Mauritania, confirming the Wall Street Journal leak and bringing it in that they really meant another place, and that's that comical article where we left off last week. But I want to give you the background, because August the 22nd, 1 week later, there was a story, opposition to Libyan leader was planned by the Reagan administration all along. And this is the Washington Post by Don Oberdorfer, who writes some pretty good articles, and it has memos of Ronald Reagan as soon as he came into office, saying that our government should make life uncomfortable for Gaddafi. As I say, he's our third largest supplier of oil, and either you deal with him or you break with him. But I keep wanting to call him Richard Nixon. They're so much alike, I can't erase the two because they work with the same people. Ronald Reagan began memos right away, similar to the way Nixon wrote, "We'll destabilize Allende and give him a hard time." As soon as Ronald Reagan was in office, he had memos going, "Let's make life uncomfortable for Gaddafi," and these were printed in the Washington Post August the 20th, detailing speeches of Reagan and Haig against Libya. Now, after they did that, the CIA came out with another denial. This was August the 26th. They didn't really plan to kill Gaddafi. But August the 22nd, besides the articles that they baited him and were trying to put pressure under him, there was another good article in the San Jose Mercury and the Associated Press, along with the Washington Post article. There have been suggestions that the U.S. might have baited the Libyans into an air battle over the Gulf of Sidra. Now, what in the world do Ronald Reagan and Alexander Haig and Caspar Weinberger want in baiting Gaddafi into World War III? Remember the articles in the New York Times that they were helping Gaddafi train kamikaze to blow up oil wells of our allies in Saudi Arabia. I have mentioned for several weeks that there are madmen in office, and the chronology of their behavior is disgusting. Now, August the 25th, 3 days after the articles talking about baiting Gaddafi and instigating trouble, Jack Anderson ran an article. I take the San Francisco Chronicle and the Monterey Herald, and each one had a different topic headline for the same article. One was called Slapstick Plot, and the same article in the evening paper here, the Herald, was called Assassination Games. And it goes into the fact that it's not Mauritius and it's not Mauritania, and Jack Anderson says that he has memos that the real truth is that William Casey and the CIA are going to target Gaddafi and kill him. And with all of this effort to kill him, you can watch the Arab nations who are behind Gaddafi get into turmoil, and we will face a confrontation that this country may never survive. What sounds like word games, or what he calls slapstick comedy, isn't very funny at all. And then Jack Anderson ran another story the next day, August 26th, the title, More CIA Plots. And that same day, the Associated Press tried to deny Jack Anderson's story the day before. And he goes into how we're going to use emigre groups, such as the Cubans, the Iranians, and so forth, and we're going to stir up trouble. It's called More CIA Plots, on how we're creating more problems overseas, and we're going to set up agencies to disrupt Iran and Libya and Cuba and Angola. And Jack Anderson said we're going to open up a Pandora's box and create coups. Now, how in the world do they think that they can accomplish anything at all by setting us so vulnerable? One thing Jack Anderson says is that they will use emigre groups that are associated with former dictatorships, such as the White Russians, the Solidaris, or the Croatians we've used from Yugoslavia, or the Nazis from Germany, or the Cubans, the Alpha 66, South Koreans from Reverend Moon, and the Vietnamese from South Vietnam, now killing people from North Vietnam in this country, or Taiwan, the professor that visited Taiwan from Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh that we talked about recently. Jack Anderson had 3 articles warning us, but he also had another interesting article that makes a full swing back to the shooting of Ronald Reagan and the job that John Hinckley Jr. didn't accomplish. Because Jack Anderson says that there's one problem with all of this, and he warns us, if we keep talking about killing Gaddafi, just as the CIA was working so hard to kill Fidel Castro, he says there's one bugaboo that troubles the most thoughtful strategist, and this is his article on assassination games, August 25th. He says assassination is a game that anyone can play, and the tempestuous Gaddafi has his own killer squads that might ambush Ronald Reagan in retaliation. The greater contribution to world stability might be a solemn pact among the heads of states that they won't try to knock each other off. Now, every country is watching the United States. They know our plans. He refers to the back rooms of the CIA to kill and to keep hatching people. But if John Hinckley Jr. didn't succeed in killing Ronald Reagan survived, and if George Bush of the CIA and Alexander Haig of the Defense Department really wanted the White House that they lost out in, think about this, what a perfect way to publish all these articles that the CIA is going to kill Gaddafi, and then have a Libyan-trained person kill Ronald Reagan, blame Gaddafi, and get rid of Reagan. The fact that they tried to shoot Reagan and get rid of Reagan, and the conspiracy of the John Hinckley family, their connections to the CIA, to World Vision, to the World Vision fronts in Cambodia and El Salvador and Guatemala and Nigeria, the Hinckley family connections to Bush and Texas and John Connally, the interlocking connections of this cabal from the Southwest and Colorado is so tremendous. And it didn't work. Ronald Reagan is alive and chopping wood up in his forest. But the point is, are they printing all these articles about the intent of the CIA to kill Gaddafi for the purpose of baiting a Libyan to kill Reagan to finish off what Hinckley didn't do? That's the bottom line of all this talk. That's what I think is happening, because it's not likely that people like Jack Anderson are printing articles, or New York Post, or not the New York Post, the New York Times, the Washington Post. There's too much talk about killing Gaddafi, and I just don't like the method that they are using of putting it in the news so much, because that is baiting the person to come back and then finish off the job, as I say, that Hinckley didn't do. Now, one of Jack Anderson's articles describes great details of medicines they were to use to kill him, and how they were to have a bug or a simulated fly put a poison, and that he would get a disease and go into coma, and it would look similar to a Libyan fly, and then he would vomit and die, and there'd be no connection to the plans to kill him. And this deadly poison has a delayed effect. Well, why is Jack Anderson going into such details? He tells that it would have no symptoms, and you get a fever, and it looks like a viral disease, and he would go into a coma. And they talked about another ring that squirts into his food or dessert. Jack Anderson is pushing this kill Gaddafi article after article, and I don't trust the way he moves. I don't think he wants to protect Gaddafi's life. If he really wanted to protect World War III, stop World War III, and protect the oil interests of the trade we have there, or the lives, he would write more about George Kurkula and the assassination tricks of the Alpha 66. There was an article about a team of anti-Castro Cubans going down to invade Guantanamo last week to get into Cuba to upset Fidel Castro. But what the major newspapers didn't say, and I take the San Francisco Chronicle, the LA Times, the 10 papers that I read didn't say, but a friend sent from the Houston Post, was that the man organizing the operation was Frank Sturgis of Watergate fame. And I thought this was pretty interesting to cover up the role of the CIA again, needling Fidel Castro and planning to kill him to take over. But it's good old Frank Sturgis, who was the man who supplied information to Jack Anderson for 20 years. Frank Sturgis was known as Frank Fiorini at the time of the Kennedy assassination, and had links with the propaganda that blamed the communists for killing John Kennedy. And of course, for years, Jack Anderson wrote articles that I have inside information from John Rosselli just before he was killed, that Fidel Castro was mad the CIA was going to kill him, so Fidel Castro arranged to kill John Kennedy. Now he is setting the stage, and this is very important because history does repeat itself. We're not smart enough to learn from history. This I've learned after 17 years of investigating conspiracies and assassinations and being on the air my 11th year, is that very few people have taken the ball and learned from past events, such as, say, looking into who took Robert Kennedy's sleeve or who destroyed the clothing of John Connally in the surgery room after they operated on the Parkland Hospital. If they did all that, they would look for the clothing of Ronald Reagan at Georgetown University Hospital and look for a direction of bullets. This role of provocateur of Jack Anderson is terribly important because he gives out a little information in order to provoke the next. And the Libyans who read all this and can contact Gaddafi can send a gang, and they can say, well, this was unknown to Gaddafi, but they were mad for their leader's sake, so on their own, a fly-by-night group could off Ronald Reagan. And then the Defense Department would have what they want. But he prints areas where we're doing espionage against Afghanistan, where we're going to do espionage against Iran. There's no reason, if half of what he says is true about these countries, there's no reason to spread ourselves so thin. Now, one of the reasons I think we're looking for areas for provocation into, say, Libya or provoking the Koreans or looking for a battle somewhere isn't because we can afford that war. It isn't that we might even lose that war or lose a lot of lives. I believe, and I've said this for a long time, that the killer team, the line of succession from, certainly the end of World War II, the overthrowing of Iran, or certainly the killer team behind the murder of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Chappaquiddick originators, the ones who arranged that accident. This team has moved their way up and guided Ronald Reagan to the presidency, Alexander Haig and William Casey. They are old boys from the old days, and their interlocking links of the various conspiracies are coming unglued. This is why I thought March 29th, the night before Reagan was shot, that there would have to be a shooting in the White House or war against Poland to divert from all the scandals that had broken out just from the past year up to the March 29th date. And the Polish situation at that point simply divested itself. The troops went home, the Russian troops. There was no more imminent war in Poland, and the shooting began in the White House. The scandals of these people are getting unglued. The link of Edwin Wilson, the link of Wilson to the Australian banks, the link of those banks to funding Michael Townley for running torture camps in Chile, the links to Jonestown. You may not see the overall pieces coming together, but many writers and authors, newspaper people, magazine writers and authors of books are seeing the pieces of the past years since World War II more clearly, and the interlocking links. And in their desperation, they could declare a war, because that when you have war, anything you say against the country is treason. The one way to get total censorship, to divert you, to keep you busy, is to keep you at war. And I believe these people are fighting for their reputation, for their scandals, for their bilking us of lives, for the pollution of the earth that they've done. And I think that they will provoke, hoping for confrontations, because these are diversions from their interlocking crimes. Well, my time is up now. It's another hour gone. This is Mae Brussell and Carmel. We don't have time for another hour, but you do your homework this week. Send me articles as you have been doing, and I'll be back with you next week at the same time.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussell. This program originates from Carmel, California.
This is KLRB Carmel. It's 11 o'clock. Time for the Taj Express.